All right, looks like we are live. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our first ever GitOps live stream. My name is Alan Houchins, and the topic for today is GitOps Infrastructure as Code for Managing Devices at Scale. This is part one of a two-part series that we're working on here at Fleet. Today, I'll be going over what is GitOps at a very basic level and why you should consider implementing GitOps as an IT leader. And then part two of our series is going to be an in-person hands-on lab where you'll be able to learn more about how to use GitOps in a kind of classroom type environment and get hands-on with using GitOps for managing devices. And our first session is coming up quickly, coming up in just a couple of weeks in San Francisco. But we would love to hear feedback from the audience on where we should go next with our hands-on workshop. But today we'll be covering the what and why of GitOps. So a couple of housekeeping items up front. There are a few members of the Fleet team in the chat who can help answer questions as I go along. There is a lot to cover today, so I'm not sure if I'm going to have a chance to answer questions live, but don't hesitate to drop those in the chat and someone from the team can help get you answers. I also wanted to note that the recording of this presentation will also be available on LinkedIn as well as our YouTube channel. So let's dive right in. The agenda for today is on the screen, as you can see. I'm going to start by giving you an introduction of me. I recognize a lot of the names on this event, so hello to the ones that I recognize, but there's also even more people that I don't recognize. So I want to give some insight into my background and hopefully bring a little bit of justification on why you should hear what I have to say. I'll then run through a very basic overview of the core principles of GitOps, share an overview of how it works and why it matters. I'll highlight the core benefits of implementing GitOps, as well as the challenges that you should be aware of. And then we'll wrap up and end with some best practices on how you can get started, as well as a recap where I'll share some resources that you'll want to bookmark and save as you begin your GitOps journey. So a little bit about myself. I started off my tech career at Apple. I worked there for nearly 9 years in various systems administration roles, supporting internal collaboration systems, as well as software deployment and management. And this is where I really found my love and passion for device management, security, privacy, and ultimately end user experiences. And this was well before device management or MDM was even a thing. I think at the time, a best practice was actually to build DMGs that open to a specific sized window, and you had a background on that image on that window that showed a user how to drag an app from the left-hand side of the screen to an applications folder shortcut. And at the time, we had to sync everything to Apache servers via rsync scripts. We were also building custom PHP frontends for MySQL databases. We have like a self-service portal. And not to age myself too much, but we also used to re-image machines by placing a heavy bolt on the N key and net booting devices. So really ancient in terms of when it comes to device management. But by the time I wrapped up at Apple, I was leading the team of engineers that managed all of the customer-facing devices in all of Apple's retail stores worldwide. So tens of thousands of devices in, frankly, one of the most hostile conditions possible. The general public was allowed to come in and use these devices in any way that they wanted to so they could make a purchasing decision. And again, I had this love for device management. And so as I left Apple, I looked at, who was big on device management at the time, who was focusing on Apple devices. And that's when I decided to join Jamf, or at the time as they were called Jamf Software. I joined when they were around 180 people and was asked to build out and lead their corporate IT and corporate security functions. And by the time that I left Jamf in 2024, Jamf had gone through multiple transitions, international expansions, acquisitions, a growing portfolio of products. And my team grew to a department of around 70. And I was the executive leader responsible for corporate IT, workplace services, and a few different platform administration teams like ServiceNow and Atlassian. But I was also responsible for the client platform engineering team at Jamf. So think about the team that runs Jamf at Jamf. And yet again, that was an incredibly challenging environment because we had to come up with ways to manage the devices of people who are also trying to build the product that manages devices. So we always had to get creative and find good ways to implement device management without impacting their ability to develop the product and ensure that they had great user experiences too. But now I've been at Fleet for around 6 months. I'm in a really unique position and role in that I get to do a number of different things on any given day. First and foremost, I get to talk with prospects and customers about fleet and device management. I get to partner closely with our product and engineering teams to help prioritize and drive feature requests. I get to build solutions, contribute code, and so much more. But I also get to run our internal instance of Fleet. And this whole experience in just this short amount of time is something I really wish I had earlier on in my career. Not only is our code open source, but our company is open core. And what that means is we force ourselves, even if it's uncomfortable, to be as open and transparent as possible about everything that we do. And that's no joke. Right now, you can go see our roadmap. You can see what bugs and feature requests that we're working on. Even our employee handbook is completely open, so you can see how we operate internally. But the reason I'm so appreciative of this experience and wish I had it earlier on in my career is I was forced to learn GitOps through this process. Having to wear so many different hats in the day means that I have to be efficient with my time. And I learned very quickly that GitOps was the best way to stay efficient when it comes to device management. And I say that while I'm super appreciative of the experience, I was very intimidated to take this on. Even someone with my background, I was very intimidated by the idea of GitOps and having to learn Git. And throughout my entire career, I always heard of GitOps or even DevOps like workflows, but always thought that those were things for engineering and that didn't have really a place with IT. And I didn't have the time to learn something new and adopt these new methodologies. And certainly earlier in my career, I appreciated working more out of a command line than a GUI. And so ultimately, I just became intimidated by learning Git. What's a push? What's a pull? What's a branch, a diff, a merge, a commit? What's the difference between a squash and a merge or even a rebase and a merge? All things that you would have to learn if you're truly learning Git. And I kind of ask those questions in jest because I still don't know the answers to a lot of what those things mean and what they do. And that's really the point that I'm hoping to drive home today is I want to introduce you to these concepts and encourage you to not be intimidated by GitOps and hopefully show you why you should take a serious look at it, even if you don't know the first thing about Git or even working out of a code repository. So enough about me. Let's start talking about the core principles of GitOps. And I'll start with a very basic definition, and it's a definition that we'll continue to kind of pick apart as we go through the rest of this presentation here. But GitOps at the core is really about managing infrastructure and configuration using Git as a single source of truth. And you might hear the terms infrastructure as code or configuration as code as terms too. And all this really means is you are going to have a code repository. And in the context of device management and fleet, code in this context is really just a collection of basic text files in an easy to understand and read format like YAML, as well as all of the other resources that you're used to using when it comes to device management. So your scripts, your software, your configuration profiles, and so on. And with this code repository in place, through processes that Git has baked in, like pull requests and merges, we can tie those automations that afford us benefits like declarative management. If it's not defined in this code repo, it's not configured differently in the application. Git also affords us really a super modern and built-in change management and version control system. And that allows us to track every single change that is made. And it even allows us to be able to quickly revert back to a known good state and even give assurances to security and compliance teams or even auditors on being able to say exactly how something was configured on a specific point in time. And these are all things that are difficult, if not possible, with many other management solutions, or may require having to spend a bunch of money on different tools and different solutions to pull all of this together. And so to borrow a phrase from my colleague that he just shared a couple days ago that really kind of summarizes what GitOps is. It's really a process that is observable, reversible, and repeatable. All right, so moving on. So how does a GitOps workflow actually work in the context of device management? And so disclaimer, this is a very basic representation that I'll walk you through, but we will go a layer deeper than this. But this is really just to spark the curiosity and again, get that basic kind of baseline understanding of what GitOps can do for you and your team. I also want to say up front that everything that I'm about to go over can be completely customized to the specific needs of your business. It can be oversimplified and it can be, evolved into being something more complex. Really, this can be molded into what you need for your team and your business. So in this image, it starts off with the step of a developer pushing a profile in the upper left-hand corner. Now, this could be a developer, but better yet, this could really be anybody in the entire company that wants to propose a change. And I'll revisit that notion a little bit later, but I want you to hold on to that thought as we go through the rest of this presentation, that when you adopt a GitOps-like workflow, you're really starting to begin to democratize the entire process of managing devices. So anyone in the company can propose a change, and this could immediately kick off automations that do a check to make sure that that change is compatible, has formatting errors, and so on. So that's that middle step there. Now, as it gets to the IT admin approve stage, what's happening is this is part of a pull request, and an IT admin or someone with authority to review that change is going to review this and say if it looks good or not, if it's going to create problems, and then give their blessing or send it back to the originator to make changes. If everything looks good, the admin can approve the change. And again, depending on your organizational needs, you might have different needs for separation of duties. But regardless, in this example here, that IT admin has the ability to then approve the change and merge that change or notify someone else to make the merge. And once that merge has happened, and that's that purple circle that you see there, this can kick off any number of additional CI/CD pipelines, being able to deliver that change directly to your production systems. And again, this can be as simple or as complex as you want it to be. You can integrate with existing CI/CD pipelines that perhaps your DevOps team already has in place, or you can adopt really basic scripts to kick off and push those changes to production. But in this case, in this stage, it's really nothing more than scripts in the case of Fleet. And really, it's scripts that are interacting with our API to push those changes to production. Now, the change is pushed to the Fleet server, and in this workflow, any devices that are scoped to that profile or that change that original developer proposed are immediately starting to receive those changes, receiving those configuration profiles, those scripts, whatever they might be. And so really anything from the review stage on is something that can happen in a matter of seconds or even minutes, depending on your desired complexity and GitOps configuration. So I know this is a lot to take in, and this is, again, a very basic example, but let's actually dive a layer deeper here with a real world example. So at this stage, we're really focusing on everything that happens before the merge. And in this case, on the left-hand side, we have Noah, who is the head of our product team. And so this is someone who's not an IT and not an engineer, but he wanted to propose a change. And that change in this case was forcing everyone to upgrade to 15.2 by a specific deadline to address security vulnerabilities. In his original proposal, if you start working your way down that list of activity, you'll notice one of the verifications failed. Noah would have been alerted of that verification failure and notified to change it. It was only after those checks came back as passed and verified that Luke was then notified to review the change. And in this case, Luke added his approval. He could have then asked for someone else to merge the change, but in our environment, Luke had the correct permissions to merge that change. And so he immediately pushed it to production. And on the right-hand side, you can see exactly what Luke had to review, right? These are very basic text files that hopefully everyone here can really kind of look at and understand immediately. I mean, it's quite literally just updating strings in a couple of variables. So again, someone outside of IT proposed this change because it was much easier to understand these simple text files versus Noah having some kind of administrative access to the UI and needing to know exactly where to go. But this change also had to be reviewed by IT, or in this case, an engineer, before it could be pushed to production. So there's a really nice sort of safety check there at separation of duty. So once Luke approved and merged that change, that is when that kicked off the CI/CD pipeline here. And in this case, that could be a collection of scripts that does a lot of things. It could alert your IT support team that this new change is being implemented and pushed to production. So watch out for user issues. It could be an alert to the team that's managing your knowledge base to make sure any supporting documents are kept up to date. Or it could just be as simple as push this change to production, right? This is all completely customizable. And so on the right-hand side, what you're seeing is a representation of this change in the UI. And again, this is super helpful for IT support teams or junior engineers who might not be comfortable working through an API or through GitOps yet, and they can still go in here and see and verify how things are configured. And again, this is a very basic example. And I know you might be looking at this and it may seem really easy. And, wouldn't it have just been easier to go into this UI and update those two fields? And you're not necessarily wrong, but think about the fact that Noah, completely outside of IT and engineering, proposed this change. He didn't have administrative access to the UI that you see here. And he didn't need to be trained on where to find this particular field, right? It's buried through a couple of different clicks. He also could have made this change in the UI without any additional approval. And so imagine if he went in here and had a typo and accidentally put in the wrong date. This is January 3rd, 2025. What if he entered 2024 by accident? And now all of a sudden, all of your devices are immediately beginning to update in the middle of the workday, right? These are all things that are solved by GitOps. Noah had access to the repo. He could see very easy and very readable text files that manage this configuration and had separation of duties before pushing this change directly to end user devices. So why does any of this even matter? Your current processes are likely working and good enough, right? Well, maybe not. Or at least imagine being able to deliver features and updates for your business much more quickly with the same or even fewer resources than you have today. Because you'll be forced to have change management and separation of duties by how you construct your GitOps repo, you can improve system reliability and stability for sure. And last but not least, you'll be able to confidently say exactly what your configuration is on any specific date. And that includes who proposed the change, who approved the change, and who published the change, all without any additional tools or system outside of your code repo. And can any of us on the call today confidently say that we could answer all of those questions? And there's some of us that certainly can, but more likely than not, there's a lot of gaps in our current change management processes that require a lot of manual efforts. And so this is why GitOps matters. Some additional benefits to implementing GitOps. First and foremost, this is a really big one, is quite literally a one-click way of reverting a change that was pushed to production. And of course, that revert, because it is done through GitOps and through your code repo, is very well documented the same way any other change is. You might also have a DevOps team in your company that's already has a CI/CD pipeline that you'll be able to hook into. So, additional benefit is some of this you may not have to create from scratch. You can tie into existing process. And last but certainly not least, GitOps itself is open source. It's not a vendor specific way to do things, and it can truly integrate with anything that has an API. And so not only do you not have to get locked into a specific vendor, there's a whole community that can support you if you have questions or want to understand how to implement a new process. Now, some additional business benefits to implementing GitOps. First off, knowing what's happening and what's changing at all times and having built-in modern change management is going to help reduce downtime. Better collaboration. This is one that may not seem very obvious up front or at first, but think about how IT teams of a certain size are structured. It's likely that once you hit a certain size, you're going to start having fractured or specialized teams that are focusing on infrastructure management versus your network engineering team versus your client platform engineering team versus IT support, right? All of these different silos, for lack of a better term. And as leaders, we try to do everything that we can to break down those silos and promote collaboration. Well, GitOps is a great way to force that collaboration. Because all of these teams will be working out of a code repo, they're going to start speaking the same language in how they manage their systems and their tools. And what that allows naturally to happen is they're going to start working more closely together, and they're going to continue to bleed over into each other's areas of responsibility with suggestions and changes for improvement, or just more easy access to information on how they can support changes that are being proposed throughout the business. Now, think about your end user experience. GitOps is a great way to democratize the configuration and operations of how IT services are provided to end users. They'll be able to observe everything about how their devices are being managed and even take part in the management of their devices, as I showed in that example where Noah proposed a change into OS enforcement. This also gives your IT team incredible scalability, because now you have users who are motivated to take part in how their devices are being managed. And so it feels like they have a real stake in the game. And so they may be proposing changes, and all your IT team has to do is review and approve versus always being the ones that have to engineer. And now for those of us who have pockets of Linux users and devices that we're supporting, we know that those are the types of people and end users who are most passionate about wanting to know exactly what's running on their devices, how they're configured, and they're also likely passionate about openness and transparency. And there's no better way to get those types of employees involved and start giving those devices the same experience as their Mac and Windows counterparts than by adopting a GitOps type of workflow. And then lastly on this slide, I want to talk through some cost savings through automation as well as hiring and consolidated tooling. GitOps is going to allow you to upskill employees and make them more valuable to different aspects of the business, because they're going to begin looking outside of just device management for GitOps opportunities and help other parts of your business build automations and kind of build into your delivery pipeline. Now, one of the statistics that I found really interesting was, according to Okta's Business at Work for 2024 report, IT teams on average are managing around 93 apps. And if you think about it, that's 93 different context switches, administrative interfaces, and things you have to get trained on to use effectively. For every single one of those that you can consolidate into a GitOps workflow, the more time IT is going to have and going to be free to work on those more engaging and creative problem solving things that we need IT people to work on. This also means that these teams are going to continue to work beyond their silos. Now, with the code repo, you also don't need a third-party ticketing system. You don't need a documentation system or even a change management system. These are all things built into Git, as well as things just built into having this sort of GitOps and code repository. And so I'll show a couple of quick examples on operational as well as tooling savings here in a second. And actually, that's right next. All right. So how many of us love our change advisory board meetings? If there was a show of hands, I guarantee there's no one who has their hand up that says they absolutely love and live for change advisory boards. And oftentimes they feel like a necessary evil, but think about it. The reason you have a change advisory board meeting is to make sure that you have separation of duties and that those things are being documented. These meetings often have some of your top engineers and leaders sitting in a room for an hour or two and reviewing previous changes that were put in place to make sure there weren't any unexpected consequences, as well as reviewing all of the proposed and upcoming scheduled changes. This separation of duties can be built directly into your process, ensuring the person who proposed or engineered a change is different than the person reviewing and even submitting the change. You could even have the person who leads your change management function being the person that does the final merge to production and fulfills any other required documentation steps. And again, this can be as simple or as complex as you need it to be. But ultimately, I want to encourage you to start thinking about how much your CAB meetings are costing you every year. Not only the meeting itself, but the lost opportunities for your engineers and leaders spending time in a meeting instead of spending, their skills and their experience and their creativity working on things more appropriate for them to deliver. And you can see the example here on the screen. One company who has an hour and a half long meeting every week with 100 attendees, and they review only 50 changes per week, is costing them nearly $750,000. So just think about that in the context of your business and start again justifying why GitOps matters and how it can be valuable for your business. Now, the other example I like using, and this to me is very personal because I started my career off in package management and creation and distribution, but I also think this is one of the most compelling reasons that GitOps matters, and that's software management. So on the left-hand side, I have a ClickOps view. And what I mean by ClickOps is a GUI or UI-driven way of administrating software management. Now think about an environment that supports the three major platforms, right? You've got Linux, you got Windows, you got Mac OS. And on the left-hand side, again, is that traditional ClickOps way of managing these devices. And let's use Zoom as an example. In a ClickOps workflow, an admin will potentially need to source, download, repackage up to 5 different versions of the Zoom installer. One for Mac, 2 for Windows because there's a difference between x86 and ARM, and then at least 2 or more for Linux because there's a difference between Debian-based hosts and RHEL or RPM-based hosts. And maybe more if you even have to break that down into architecture. On top of that, every single time an update comes out, admins have to start the entire process over again. So that in and of itself could be a full-time job because that was just one example with Zoom. Now apply that to every single app that's in your environment. What does that look like in a GitOps way, in a GitOps type of workflow? Well, on the right-hand side, you can see these are 3 examples that show how easy it is to achieve the same exact outcome. And so you'll notice for Mac and Windows, it's set. If you look at the URL path there, they're pointed at URLs that are always going to download the latest version of those applications. So this is truly a set it and forget it type of thing. Once I've created this text file one time, I never have to go and download the latest version of Zoom ever again. And my employees and my end users are always going to have the latest version available to them in self-service. For the Linux example, you'll notice the URL has a very specific version identifier in it, and that's because there is no URL available that will always download the latest version. But think about it. What's easier? Is it easier to have an admin go and download that package and upload it through a GUI and set all of the parameters and settings? Or is it easier for anybody in the company to look at that URL and know that that version string needs to be updated and propose a change to get that updated? And then take literal seconds once an approval and review has happened to push that change to production. So again, GitOps can help improve these methods. They can truly get you to a set it and forget it type of approach when it comes to software management and other aspects of device management. And these are real-time savings, not only time, but cost savings because your teams aren't spending time doing repetitive, boring work. You're going to improve engagement because employees are going to be working on things that require their creativity and their problem-solving skills. It doesn't take a lot of brain power to go and download a new package just to upload it and get it distributed. So again, think about this in terms of the scale of your business. This is just Zoom as the example. Think about how many apps your team supports today and multiply that out, and you'll start seeing some real, true cost savings and time savings. Now, all of this sounds great, and there are going to be potential challenges that you're going to have to overcome with adoption and implementing GitOps. Once again, there's that intimidation factor of having to learn Git. And as IT professionals and as IT leaders, we really need to start moving away from the stigma that can be out there that everything needs to be done through a command line, especially when it comes to adopting some kind of brand new process. I was the first to admit I still don't understand what all of the different Git commands do, but I've adopted GUI tools and applications that solve that for me. It's much easier for me to understand how to push something or how to make a commit message by having a GUI help me with that. So there's going to be learning curves for teams. There's going to be resistance to change. And this is the same resistance we face with anything new that's introduced, right? Some people are going to jump on it and champion it. Others are going to just be resistant to the change because what we have in place works well enough for them. And so when I think about GitOps, I think that really any IT engineer is going to get excited about the fact that they're going to learn a new skill, they're going to get out of meetings, and they're going to start working on more engaging and creative work. There is going to be some initial setup complexity. Again, the same sort of complexity that you would have with implementing any new process or any new tool. But one thing I like to call out, kind of selfishly on behalf of Fleet, is we've built GitOps into the core foundation of our product. And as a result, we actually have a starter pack available that anyone can download and quite literally within minutes start getting set up and using GitOps. And we'll go over that a little bit later on how you can access that resource. But the initial setup complexity is going to pay off in dividends when it comes to ongoing maintenance. Again, going back to that software management example, I never have to go in there and download and upload a new version of software ever again for some of those titles that have URLs that point to the latest and greatest version at all times. A couple other challenges. There could be bottlenecks if this is not managed correctly. And those bottlenecks include things like waiting on someone to approve a change. But those are very easy obstacles to overcome. You can build in Slack notifications and use different tools or processes that will, alert people that there's action to be taken. And over time, as you adopt GitOps, these will just become natural things, and you'll eventually just become a well-oiled machine on how you operate in a GitOps-like workflow. And like any system, there are going to be inherent risks if policies and access controls aren't well defined. For example, and definitely speaking of myself here as well, anyone that has ever used a code repo long enough has very likely been guilty of accidentally uploading a password or some kind of authorization token directly to the repo in plain text. And so, again, this is calling out that there is a risk for that happening if you don't have well-defined policies and access control in place, right? As long as you have the proper checks and balances and separation of duties, someone could see, hey, why is this password in plain text here? Let's send that back and let's, change that into a secret variable or something else, rather than pushing that to production for the whole world to see. Next up, some mitigation strategies to talk about some of those challenges, and I kind of went over a couple of these already as we went through that. But what I want to say is when it comes to training and sort of this phased implementation, I mean, first and foremost, the fact that you're here listening to this is a really great first step. I would definitely encourage you to pay attention to when Fleet does our little roadshow and does hands-on labs if you really want to see how to use GitOps specific to Fleet and device management. So we're already heading in the right direction here by attending this meeting. But I also encourage you to check out Fleet's premium support or use any of the open communities like the Mac Admins Group or OS Query, where others can help you on your GitOps journey. And again, don't try to take this all on in one step. Take a very small and iterative approach, right? I think we all have heard the term crawl, walk, run, and the same would be true with GitOps. Start small, get all the kinks ironed out, and then start growing. And again, I kind of mentioned this, it is about choosing the right tools and workflows. There are certain things that just do not work for GitOps, so don't try to force GitOps where it doesn't make sense. And there are tools that can help even someone like me who is still intimidated by Git on the command line to help get over those intimidations and start contributing in a very positive way just by selecting the right tools. So, how to get started with GitOps? First and foremost, you need to evaluate your current processes and the readiness for your team. Is this something your team has time to take on right now? If not, how can you get it prioritized? How can you build it into your roadmap? How can you carve out time to work on it while also supporting the demands of the business? And the business may not understand the value into why this should be prioritized. And that's where you, as a leader or an architect, need to really showcase the benefits of GitOps, tying it back to time and efficiency gains and spending and cost savings and that sort of thing. Again, I encourage you to start with a pilot project. Fleet is a great project to start with because we offer a free open starter pack that you can download today. And as long as you can read a README file and fill in a couple of credentials, you're off and running in minutes. It's also worth noting that Fleet is an open source product, so anyone in the community can help you with your GitOps journey as well. Work with your team to choose the right tools. Again, remove those stigmas around things needing to be command line only. Yes, there are going to be engineers that are comfortable with doing that, and that is great. Hopefully, they can teach and upskill the rest of your team. But in the meantime, command line only is not a great fit for everyone. First off, choose what kind of repo you want to use. Is it GitLab? Is it GitHub? Is it Bitbucket? Also, take a look at what GUI apps you should standardize on. This way, everyone can help out each other. And then also come up with a list of code editors that you all should work on, right? Again, this doesn't have to be Nano or Vim on the command line. These can be GUI apps that have a lot of key benefits in them. For me personally, as someone who is completely intimidated by Git, I really like using the GitHub desktop app because it's a very clean, simple interface that makes it very easy to understand what all of the different Git processes are, like committing and creating pull requests and branches and so on. And then I like using Sublime Text as my code editor because it shows me formatting errors in real time, so I can prevent even getting to the stage of proposing a change that has an error in it just due to formatting. Another popular choice is VS Code, and that combines code editing and the Git commands into one app. So again, spend the time with your team to figure out what works best for you. It is very important for you to define clear policies up front. And again, this is things like, how do you want approvals and pull requests to work? When should you use a secret versus when is it okay to put something in plain text in your repo? You're going to want to look at automating where you can. This is going to help you with testing and validation. And again, if you use our starter pack, a lot of this stuff is already built in for you. And it's also important for you to engage your stakeholders early. Engage them early on this idea, on why you think we should be, your team and your business should be doing GitOps more. And what you may uncover is that you might have a pocket of DevOps people who are already doing CI/CD who can kind of take this on and embrace it and actually help you achieve your outcomes much more quickly. Or just integrate or copy from them directly. So wrapping up, there are a couple of key takeaways that I hope you take away from this presentation today. And there's also a couple of things that you should think about in terms of next steps. First and foremost, hopefully you got at least a very basic understanding that GitOps can really drive efficiency, security, collaboration, and cost savings. And by adopting GitOps, it can become a strategic boon for you. It can give you a competitive edge because you'll be able to do things faster. You'll have more agility, and your systems will be kept up to date and just up in general with greater resiliency. But it's important for you to assess the feasibility within your organization. Look at your teams, look at your current skills, look at the current gaps and priorities, and get an understanding of can your team take this on? And if not, what do you need to do as a leader to help get them to that stage of being ready? Part of that is identifying champions, right? I'm sure you're going to find a person or two on your team that's going to love doing this. They want to take it on as a passion project and get everyone up to speed. Keep pouring gasoline on that type of fire as you can. And then align your GitOps initiatives with business goals. I think this is probably, it's last on the list, but it's probably one of the most important ones because I'm sure most of us are being asked by executive teams to find savings or do more with less or if we're lucky enough, do more with the same amount of resources that we have today. And I truly believe GitOps is one of those ways that you can achieve that, again, by removing the mundane and the repetitive tasks and allowing your teams to focus on the engaging, strategic, more creative work. So wrapping up, this is a list of very helpful resources that I would love for you to bookmark or at least come back to as needed. First and foremost, if you go to our Fleet GitHub repo and you search for the IT and security folder, you can see exactly how we run Fleet at Fleet, including all of our configuration, how we structure our files, our libraries, all of that stuff. And don't hesitate to ask questions on why we do things a certain way. We may not have it the best way, but it's been effective for us and would love to partner with the community on finding even better ways that we could operate that. The next resource, if you go to the Fleet DM GitHub repo and look for the repo specifically called Fleet-GitOps, this is a starter pack that you can download and get started with today. Again, I think there are 2 or 3 steps that you need to take in order to actually get this up and going. So hopefully that can at least start sparking the creativity and interest in GitOps just by downloading that and going through that setup process. Next on the list is just a link to our YAML files. This will show you the structure of the documents that we, or of the files that we expect when it comes to GitOps, as well as all of the available options for you. In addition to the YAML files, I would definitely encourage you to check out the API files as well, just to see all of the additional flags and features that you can start building into YAML. Next is just a link to my personal GitOps repo. This is where I like to break things and try things out before pushing that on to Fleet employees. So there's a lot of things in there that are kind of experimental, but it should be open to the world, and feel free to comment and ask questions about what's going on there. The next link is a link to Harrison's GitOps repo. Harrison's my counterpart, and he's the one that's going to be delivering the hands-on how to use GitOps lab. And that's another place that he likes to try things out and break things before we push them to production. And then the last link here is just an article that I wrote late last year that really is a good summary of everything that I talked about here today that you can use as collateral internally to try to sell and pitch why your team should be adopting GitOps. And so with that, we actually went through that content fairly quickly. I hope you all found it valuable. I think we will have some time here for some questions. But in the meantime, on the screen here, you can see a link to my LinkedIn account. Don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions or want to see a personal demo. There's also a link to my Calendly if you just want to book time with me and go over this and see how it actually works. And again, as you see at the top, not in sales, so this won't be a sales pitch. We can talk about the tech and talk about how to do this and why you should do it. So with that, I want to thank everybody. Oh, and I also want to say, if you have any feedback on this presentation itself, I'd love to hear it. What resonated with you? What would have been nice to go into more in depth? Again, this is version 1. So would love to improve on this, and would also love to hear what cities we should travel to do some of these hands-on labs. So with that, I will say thank you to everybody if anyone wants to drop off. Otherwise, we got a good 10 or 15 minutes here that we can answer a couple of questions live.